Hello and welcome to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, ethical risk, and effective governance. I'm joined by our Chief Sales Officer, Bryan. Bryan, how's it going? Thanks for coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's pretty good. I feel a lot of positive momentum. Uh, Last week, I was able to give a cool speech for a nonprofit here in Richmond. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I haven't mentioned that before.
I'd love to hear how it went. Like what I
Yeah.
heard great reviews from people who were there, and so unfortunately I wasn't able to attend, but I heard good things. So I'd love to hear. What did you talk about? How did it go? What do you think the response was?
Yeah, and I've given a couple of top speeches or presentations on AI governance. And so I lead the AI governance cohort for this nonprofit here in Richmond called AI Ready RVA. And it's really doing some awesome things here in the Richmond area, trying to grow the community for AI literacy and all those things. So um, the whole speech was our launch event for the governance cohort. Maybe like 30, 40 people in attendance. So nothing too extravagant, but my whole presentation, I try to look at it from not just a BABL point of view, but obviously that was kind of the core. We'll get into the reports and stuff I pulled in, but I was really trying to make sure that people understood the value of AI governance. And I think when I kind of structured the whole presentation, it was important for people to understand that it's not just something to do because you want to be nice or like an ethically driven thing. There's real business value in AI governance. So I really went and found some kind of supplemental documents, and I can even maybe just make those all available as like an attachment on this, maybe link them up. But yeah, really try to get people to understand what is AI governance, how does that fit in the larger taxonomy of governance. We've talked about this a few different times. It's kind of an extension of your traditional governance or risk management, this enterprise risk management profile, but specific to AI risks and the unique risks that those bring in, and the strategies that you need to employ. Moved into how do you evaluate yourself quickly what are some questions that you should have confidence answering? Like, if you don't, maybe you should spend some more time. So kind of tease some of those. Then, all right, what's the structure? What are foundational structures of governance? And that's where we pulled in some of the BABL research that we did back in 2023. And we kind of have that template available, make that available through our education classes and courses. You have a good course on that in the AI Audit Certificate Program. And then I pulled in this really awesome playbook, enterprise playbook that Anthropic actually published and put out. And what I thought was so cool about that and why I did that is the first thing they say is establish AI governance because you need it to scale. And then the rest of the whole thing is, an operational playbook from an idea to enterprise adoption. And that was really fun to explore. And we kind of just were able to touch on the tip of the spear, all those points, and provided all those. But I thought the reception of the information went well. It turns out they were actually doing NPS scores on the end, so I think I got an okay score on that. But it was a really good event. It was fun to talk about those things, and then I ran way long on questions, so everyone had a lot of good questions. But AI governance is certainly this topic that is getting a lot more. I don't know, just emphasis, talk, and I see more and more and more on it because I think people are starting to recognize that it's not just a component of risk management. It's like, this is where you win in AI. It's a competitive advantage to have your governance right because you're aligning your business objectives to measurable outcomes. And AI, like once you put it in motion, I think I put this in the slide, I was like, it's hard to correct where that rocket's going once you're in flight. Like if you don't have that flight plan figured out ahead of time, that's what I pulled into that. So those
I'd,
things
lo-
sound.
I'd love to hear the rocket. I heard
Oh
about the
yeah,
rocket
for sure.
analogy. So tell me what is the analogy here with the rocket?
Oh, so the analogy, and I don't know. So you would never hop in a rocket and hit the red button and say go, right? You would expect that there was flight planning, that people have inspected the ship, that you had a command center that you could reach back to if you had questions, that had thought of all these things. So it's just kind of the dichotomy of like people that are just throwing AI into things and saying we got to go there now, boom, hit the red button and go, and hope that you reach the moon. right? It's a very low percentage chance that that's going to happen versus if you take a structured approach, you have the planning, you have everything kind of pre-organized, which is governance. Then you can actually achieve your mission of reaching the moon a lot higher the success rate. So I try to paint those two things, and the fact that you study all this rocket science is what I say these days.
Yeah.
It just kind of lands. So
I love that analogy. I think that's great, because I think a lot of people think, in fact, they use the rocket ship emoji a lot when they're talking about let's go with AI. They're very gung ho, and it is a perfect analogy. It's like a lot could go wrong. It doesn't happen by default. It doesn't just happen.
is and I take a lot of liberties as a salesperson, so keep me in check here. Like you are doing rocket science behind the scenes. We're actually doing some of this math, right? Like vectors and all that stuff. I watched some of the tutorials and things that you put out before, but like effectively, it's kind of trajectories and measuring and where are we going to land, and there's a little
Yeah,
bit of
it's
rocket science in this, right?
yeah, it's a little bit. I mean, I think I'm surprised at the amount of physics that I end up finding useful in data science and machine learning. Like and in some sense, AI researchers and data scientists have become kind of like the new rocket scientists. Like the old term,
Yeah.
like it's not rocket science. And now has
Yeah,
that
I
similar
use that. I was like, but
connotation.
it actually is rocket science, and we know how to do it. So that's always fun, and I know we've had a lot of really cool examples of that on other episodes. We don't need to dive all the way into it, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
definitely that example landed.
yeah, that's perfect. So you said there were a lot of questions. I'm curious, like what were the kind of things that people were a little unsure about or didn't understand?
That's a good question. I didn't write any specifically down. A couple that stood out. Some people are asking about, how does regulation apply to this? Like, what should people be paying attention to versus, kind of the state level or the federal or the global regulations? Like, what decisioning should you be going through within an organization? I gave the example. Apparently, everything was like flight or rocket ship. It's like, all right, well, if you're flying a plane, if you fly at 30,000 feet, and I stole this from a lawyer buddy at the Startup Virginia here. If you're flying a plane and you get to 30,000 feet, you're going to spend more fuel, effort, and money to get there, but then you throw it on cruise control and you get to where you're going without really worrying about hitting any buildings or mountains. But if you only get so far off the ground, 5,000, 10,000 feet, you might have to start dodging buildings or mountains or things like that. So I then go with the hardest. If it's EU AI Act because you're global, benchmark to that. It is a lift, or ISO 42001. Like go with the hardest thing, and as long as you are matched there. So that was a good question. People ask about the new administration and kind of the changing of the regulations. The new executive order was mentioned, just a lot of general questions. Some people did try to get me on some technical, and I just had to bail. I'm like, I'll
Yeah.
set up a meeting because that's not me. But
Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
so
Yeah, I think the thing I find is that I think a lot of people don't understand or want to understand what it is actually entail. Like what do you actually do? Like you say AI governance, and the metaphor of the rocket ship, and there's a lot that goes in. There's a lot of moving parts in a rocket ship, and there's
there are.
a lot of different stakeholders that have to interact with it. Each part typically is built by different people, and it has to be inspected and approved, and there's regulations that are related to it. And the analogy is pretty strong, but I think that the reality of AI governance often is a lot simpler than what people imagine, and I think that in my opinion, at least, it's a lot about clarity early on. Like, what is it exactly? Because in the case of a rocket ship, you know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get from one point to another safely, fast, and without any problems. And but with AI, it's a little bit different. It's like, what's the purpose? And I think defining that purpose is often uh, the toughest. Like those early stages of defining exactly what am I trying to do? What's the business value I'm
Yeah.
trying to get from this? And then what are the things I actually need to do? If you say governance is important, what do I actually need to do? And that's where people struggle to have the imagination of, and it turns out that a lot of it is just really intuitive things. If you have the clarity, it's just checking the things that are just very obvious, and making sure that everything's working right. And that's where I feel like people's eyes open up when they can hear kind of a story of like what's an actual process, AI governance process.
Yeah, I definitely. What's obvious to you and people that have been in the AI governance space is very much not obvious to most people. But I do see light bulbs turn. Right. I did have a couple people just like, oh, I never would have thought AI governance was like that. But definitely some questions wanted to go deeper into that exercise, and like I said, all those articles, the readiness questions, there's a 25-page document. It might even be longer. Our report's a 30-page document. The Anthropic thing's almost 40 pages, and they really do a really great job of just step by stepping through questions, and explaining the why behind it, so that people can do their own research to have their own light bulb go off. So yeah, I think most people want to do it right. They don't want to make a mistake, which creates a lot of hesitancy and then inaction in that. So the
Yeah.
more people we can get to understand kind of the basics, the foundations, and then as AI solutions and being implemented, they're rapidly becoming more complex. So what I really like about our AI governance, like the four steps of it, it's like that is repeatable over and over and over again, no matter what the AI use case is, because it's just first principles. And I think that is what I generally went back to is, as long as you get the basics of the mechanics, the foundational layer, you're going to be able to apply that over and over and over again. So it felt like all three of those documents in there, the heavy components of that, are all foundational level. That's what I look for, and help with your decisioning and all those.
Yeah.
I certainly am not weighing in on like the legalities of things, or like which metrics produce the outcome that actually is desired versus creating some sort of like false outcome. And
Yeah.
there's all sorts of different reasons how you question or create that prompt or outcome, or the data you're using that can mess with that. But that's when you
Yeah.
get into the weeds and you need experts. So, but the
Well,
mental
there was a
model
great
is consistent.
recent TechUK paper that came
Mm.
out that talking about the field, like, because it's so multidisciplinary. There's a lot of different things to think about. The responsible AI field or AI governance field, and it was great because they mentioned our program, which is was always nice, and we were interviewed for that, and we've talked to the UK people, and they're great. But it does show that there's just so many different activities in this field that people can do, and there's so many different skills and specialties. Some of it's legal, some of it's technical, but increasingly it doesn't feel like, I think it's actually a fact that more and more kind of ordinary business professionals are getting into, have to understand AI governance more. And because of this, we at Babel are now putting together a special certification of AI governance. I think it's called Foundations of AI Governance for Business Professionals. That's a mouthful. It's something along those lines, but we'll try
There's
to
a good
link this.
acronym in that. We'll work it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Somewhere in there, there's a nice acronym. But I think the attempt here for us is that it's to lay that foundation for people. Is because there are, and I think the way I'm approaching it, I was a professor for many years, and I'm still teaching as part of Babel. I really care about like trying to boil things down for people and to make it as actionable as simple as possible. And this is like the ultimate test of that, because I already did that as we put together our AI auditor certification program, trying to boil things down to
Mm.
like because there's so many skills you need in this. And now we're trying to go even further for the average business professional that's going to be the HR professional, the legal professional, the risk person, just the salesperson. What do they need to understand? Because all of them have a role to play in governance, and I'm really excited about it because I think we've kind of zeroed in on a few key kind of frameworks on how the mental models for thinking about governance. That doesn't take, you don't have to be an expert. It's just going to direct you to pay attention to some of the important things where,
Yeah.
um, you can get the business value but avoid some of the pitfalls, and that's kind of the optimal approach. But in any case, that's coming out very soon. I think we're probably going to launch it maybe even by the time this episode comes out, in which case we'll have a link. That should be launched.
Well, I'll say that I might be the best example of someone who doesn't have all that technical back end knowledge, but understanding those baselines. I can spot and see a lot of challenges where, oh, that's a risk, that's this. Like once you start to, you can adopt that and employ that as part of your own kind of evaluation, you can rapidly spot. So sales guy here, right? So I like to say that you can start with governance. It's the opportunity, I think, for really anybody at any position within an organization to step into a leadership role. It is challenging. There's a lot of decisioning. You need to be able to critically and analytically think about things. But if you have those and you have domain knowledge, you're incredibly valuable to that organization and being able to help lead their AI governance and everything that, I just was talking about. If you have your AI governance right, you feel more confident in scaling and, really putting a little more gas on the pedal. But to kind of go back to the, so I'm really excited about the certification, but I want to go back to the TechUK paper. I do think this is interesting, and I spent a little time reading it, and they highlight 3 key areas where, so what is it called? Mapping the responsible AI profession. So it's focused heavily on AI ethics, governance, and responsible use. But I'm reading it. So it's the absence of clear role definitions and organizational placement. So people don't even know where AI governance should fit within an organization, who should be a part of it. The lack of structured career paths. So it's not like people have been working towards becoming an AI governance expert, since they were, a high schooler or something along those lines. It's 2 years ago, no one knew what the heck AI governance was or cared about it broadly. And now it's becoming, most organizations have, some semblance of a path towards it. But then you don't have standardized skills. It's whoever's read something maybe here or there. So having, and training frameworks is the other thing, lack of skills and training frameworks. So I think what's great about what we're trying to do with the governance certification on our end is we're mapping that towards our AI audit certificate program. So when we think about governance, this is how AI is managed. We obviously have the opinion, and most people do as well. Third-party audit assurance is a great way to ensure the trust that what's hopefully being delivered is actually getting there. So I think mapping those skills towards an auditing framework that's pretty widely accepted, does create a little more strength in what we're trying to get across, and obviously, trying to get people to do governance the right way and towards better outcomes, and using AI ethically there. So yeah, I think the paper's great, and they just call out a lot of we don't know who does what, when and where within an organization, and what skills are we actually looking for, and also trying to figure out the strategy of how does AI win? Am I going to lose the arms race? I can see how governance gets lost in the shuffle, but what's your opinion on some simple moves that executives or business decision makers could maybe start to how could they define some roles? Where should it maybe be in an organization, the governance team? Some of those things. We talked a little bit about our education, but we don't need to turn this into a commercial. Tell me a little bit more on that.
So, I mean, the nice thing is we see a lot of different structures in the organizations that we audit, and there are different approaches. And so, for example, some organizations have taken the route of having a centralized special AI governance or risk function. Sometimes it's called they have maybe an AI council, an AI ethics board, some sort of group, and often it will have some executive or involvement where they're participating in that. And then they define a lot of the activities around AI. That's one approach, which is I think if I were putting myself in the shoes of an executive that was just starting out, they haven't got anything at all, that's probably the best route to take first. Is get some smart people that are representing the business units that are using AI currently, and either as a like you're producing it, like you're a provider of AI systems, or you're deploying them internally. So get some HR, get some C-suite, maybe the CISO or the DP, data protection
DPO.
officer or something like that.
Yep.
That's the best way to start, probably, if you haven't done anything at all, because then they can start thinking about, okay, what do we have currently for resources? And I think I've mentioned the sort of the early stages quite a bit, where it's like you have to get an inventory, you got to know where you're using AI, you have to get a basic risk kind of triage of like, it's really categorization, risk categorization. How risky are these? And it's going to depend on the jurisdiction, where how you're using the AI and that kind of thing, what level of risk. And then you start kind of deploying the next stage. So now, since I've mentioned that stuff so much before, let's talk a little bit about what that next stage might look like. So
Yeah.
the next stage is going to depend a lot on that initial risk categorization. So let's say for a second that you've found that you actually have fairly high risk uses. So maybe the AI in your product or service is actually making some critical decisions, or something like that. Or internally, maybe you're using it in some high risk ways, like you have some really sensitive information that you're passing through LLMs or something. Maybe you're using it to make some logistics decisions for your business that's pretty critical for a business function, or using it in HR where you're like actually hiring people, which is probably, you're going to be regulated there.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that you have some need for governance because you've identified risk. The next thing you kind of need to do is to understand resourcing. How are you going to tackle that risk? Now, we have a process in BABL about how you would go from identifying the risk, figuring out what the right control is, and then implementing the control. You can use that, but however, who's going to do it, and how is that information going to flow across the business? And that's one of the tougher things, because I can teach that to somebody. I can teach you the process of identifying risk, figuring out the ways in which the AI affect that risk, either increase it or decrease it. That's going to lead you to controls, and then you can implement those controls. But each individual business is going to be different in the way they have, in terms of their internal capabilities, the way they communicate, their ways of working, how they're structured. So most of what we see people doing in this second stage of, like, we now know that there are risks and we want to mitigate them, is basically going to be a resource allocation issue. So as an example, some organizations, it turns out, you have to have a risk assessment. So one of the key things is you have to do a detailed risk assessment for a particular AI system. You have many of them, let's say, and you need to go for each one, you have to assess the risk. Who's going to do that? And a lot of times it's cross-functional. Sometimes it's in HR, sometimes it's in product. So oftentimes, actually, the privacy professionals are the best equipped, because they've already had to do, most of the time, personal information is getting processed, and that's why it's high risk. And so privacy professionals have a mechanism for contacting people and doing a data protection impact assessment. So in those cases, you would say, well, let's not reinvent the wheel and come up with a whole new mechanism. Let's make sure that same channel, however they're communicating, the privacy professionals with all of these various cross-functional groups, are going to now be trained and have a new sort of AI risk assessment attached to that data protection impact assessment. In fact, the EU AI Act suggests, and in some cases requires, depending on how you read the law, that happens at the same time. So that's one example of like a practical step of like, how do we even get information from people? Do we send them a form? Do we sit down and expect the product owner to fill it out and send it back? Do we send a person and say, let's book a meeting and go through the form together? What kind of training do those people need? Those are the kind of details, those second level details, that are going to depend on an organization. But anyway, that's typically what the next step is like, I've identified risk, I've triaged everything, I know we have different AI being used in different places. I'm now going to implement some initial governance, which is probably going to start with risk assessment. It's going to take some organizational mapping and finding the resources.
I'd also interject that, like a PMO, some sort of operational ADCAR, type change management is really important, because what you're really talking about is internal communications, internal training, and there is a change happening. So I think maybe even leaning into change management within an organization once you get to that phase two, that's probably a really interesting conversation to explore what are those existing change principles and how do they map over into communicating all this AI governance across your organization. And there's probably even some history we could draw into, like how has this happened in the past with data governance or privacy governance. So that's why you mentioned those roles as well. So if they've already gone through this, they're going to have some principled approaches. It might be different, context a little bit, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say, yeah, look at the past. There's probably some wins, and there's probably some existing functions that can be shifted into taking and carrying that torch. But I think change management is really important there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think so the change management comes in, and we've seen this because that initial phase, that second phase I was just talking about, that's just the beginning.
Yeah,
Because then you're going to realize, okay, there are lots of different things we're going to need to do. So we're going to need to like have testing, monitoring, training. These risk assessments probably will have to be renewed and redone, and we'll have a risk registry and things like that. Those are all of those functions you are going to have to figure out a way to. It can't just be a whole. You don't stand up a whole new business unit, right? You're going to have the governance at the sort of higher level, and that you've started, but you're not going to have those people doing all of this work, and you're not going to want to hire all new people to do this work. And so the change management comes from how do we integrate these activities into what we already have.
yeah,
And the sort of the end phase here is that it's probably not going to be a centralized AI governance. You might still have that committee, but the internal audit function is going to change. Your risk people, if you're in a bank and you have model risk management, they're probably going to have to incorporate some of the activities will be incorporated there. The HR people will be doing their part. The product owners are going to have responsibilities, and so it's going to diffuse out because it has to be integrated eventually. The end state here is not that there's just a totally parallel, circulatory system in your business that's just AI governance. It's going to be, and I think your whole point of your presentation is this is business. It's not AI
yeah,
governance. This is about making your business successful. And so that's the final state, and that's where a lot of the change management stuff is going to come in, and it's going to take reskilling. I mean, in fact, that's the motivation for us doing this training.
yeah. I'm curious. I'll hit on the training thing. When you're having these conversations with, because you talk to the majorities, C suites and all sorts of different size organizations, is the assumption that it is kind of its own siloed organization and team with AI governance, or is it more kind of the distributed decision makers within an organization, convening periodically and setting things up? Like what is, as you just mentioned, like what is the common starting point for
So
organizations?
we've seen it a whole range. That's the
Okay,
part of the problem. I think that's part of what the TechUK sort of research was about, is highlighted, is that it's all kind of all over the place. And
right.
so it comes at like at the critical juncture. So for smaller like SMEs and below, it's much more likely to be there'll be a nucleus of activity where it's like a product owner is going to get some pressure from their clients, let's say, to be like, well, do you have risk management? Do you test things? Whatever. And so it starts there because they feel that pressure. And then it trickles up. The C suite will start recognizing that, oh, we got to do something because this is our business and we have to make sure that we're going to continue to get through procurement. And so they start to get a more systematic or company wide approach. Other cases, it's like there might be some legal threat. So the compliance team, like they might get sued, or they might
Yeah,
be someone might make a complaint, and they're like, oh shoot, we need to do something. What are we going to do? They start thinking about it, and that's happening at like maybe the general counsel. In fact, general counsel that's who reaches out to us often. Is it like the AI compliant, the compliance team, or the general counsel, the legal team? And in other cases, so that happens very often. And sometimes there's HR teams. So HR is procuring a new AI tool to screen resumes, and they're like, oh, wait a second, there's some regulations around this. We need to worry about governance. and then they start digging in there. At the higher level, though, like at enterprise, you're much more likely to find a top-down approach where they've already been burned by things like GDPR and information security. They've gotten sued about these sorts of things. They might have gotten some bad press, or they're seeing bad press about misuse of AI from their competitors, also enterprise companies. And so they say, oh, we need to do something more systematic. They'll have like a governance council. They'll have some C-suite level activity. And then that's when they start to like, we're going to map our organization to figure out where we're using AI and let's do it more systematically. So we've seen it kind of both ways.
Yeah, that makes sense though. It kind of, if it's depending on the maturity of the business, you either have some, structure that you've gone through in the past, or if you're new to the space, you're very much or figuring it out on the fly. So I do see that. Certainly opens up some opportunities to assist in this kind of that mid to small space, a lot more quickly. But yeah,
I mean that's a pretty common question I get, like in our training program. Almost every week in the Q&A sessions, I'll get somebody saying like, well, how do you start? How do because I mean, you can just Google what kind of jobs are out there for, like if you typed in, if you're listening to this on YouTube, just go to Google and type in AI governance jobs past 3 weeks. Google will populate a list and you'll see it there. It's a ton. And they'll be like AI compliance manager for JP Morgan Chase, or, eBay wants ethics advisor, whatever. Right. And there's just a ton of those things. And it's normally the bigger companies. There's also smaller ones. But the fact of the matter is, what's the reality of the end state here? There are not that many people that have experience in this. I know for a fact. We train a lot of them. We audit a lot of these companies. They're not a ton of people. So what you're going to get is a person who's like kind of somewhat trained, have some like took a Coursera course, so they're interested in this. Maybe they came from an adjacent like a legal field. They're going to get put in that role, and then they're going to have to do something, right, in an organization which already has processes, already has things going on. And this is the crunch time, because it's like you are going to be put in a position that's like middle management to lower, and you have to essentially find a way to fulfill what they want, which is they want to be compliant, they want to be fully functioning, so all risk gone, and fully productive implementation of AI for efficiency, right?
Yeah.
And those people are not going to be equipped. And so we get a lot of those people in our program who are just like, where do I start here? And that's where it's going to be a puzzle. And you have to figure out, how is my organization distributed? Where does information flow? And how do I take the things I know have to happen, which is what you learn in our course? What are the things? There's a very small set of things, but they're really important and they got to happen. How do I get those things to happen when it's just me and maybe a small team, and then the rest of the organization? Yeah. And that's where it's going to take savvy people who understand business and understand communication really well.
Yeah, that's a really good, I want to call this point out. I think it's good. If they get stuck in kind of a mid-management role, I think people don't, like, that's where that kind of enters in. Certainly I've taken some courses on how to navigate from the middle position within an organization, how to get buy-in at the top, those types of things. So yeah, it's funny because as you said that, I've mentioned in the last, during that presentation, like you have to get executive buy-in. So you have to be able to understand what is the business strategy that they're trying to achieve, and then kind of map your AI governance strategies towards that and those business outcomes. So yeah, it's definitely interesting because people generally care about money at the top. So AI governance has to bring in the dollars, and that's what's really was kind of cool to see in some of those other articles, not Babel produced, but how it really does drive and dictate future profitability and future achievement of mission and goals and targets with AI. So a full circle moment there. But yeah, mid managers, we love you. We love you. We're helping you.
It's a bit of a rock and a hard place, but it's possible.
Yep.
It is
Yeah,
possible. You
absolutely.
have to,
There's certainly courses on it. It's funny. I was discussing a change management course I took one time. You're a middle manager. You're trying to do something. How do you change and drive that? So, maybe we'll have to bring some change champions on one of these, and they can dive in, or maybe that would be part of the the new AI academy we got. So,
yeah, no,
stuff.
absolutely. I mean, I think one of the webinars I wanted to do within the program, and I've given talks before in other venues for this, but it's basically what's the business case for AI governance?
Mm-hmm.
And there's basically, I mean, I won't go through now, but I'll tease the basic idea is like I always do because I'm a physicist. I work from first principles. There's only two arguments here. So there's three. There's only three things. There's one is like downside risk. So minimizing downside risk. So I'm not going to get fined. I'm not going to lose money in different ways. I'm not going to have sort of like reputation that will damage my profits. There's the upside, which is I'm going to look better than my competitors. I'm going to sell more. I'm going to be more productive. I'm going to get more efficient employees because they trust the tools that we're procuring or we're producing, and so they're going to use them more and be more confident. And then there's like I just want to do the right thing. The intrinsic, I just want to be better for many different reasons, right? So working from there, like there's the argument that you make to anybody, and we make these arguments when we're in sales conversations as well. It's the same thing when you're a middle manager. You're trying to sell it to like, why do I spend money on this? It's like, how am I hitting all three of these things? Well, one of them is just you hope that you get somebody who cares. The other two, though, you can quantify,
Yeah.
and you got to do your best to quantify. Like, what is the minimum charge if I get pinged for producing the wrong information from the EU AI Act? That's 7.5 or maybe 7. I don't know, 7 or 7.5 million euro. So if I write the wrong thing about my compliance, make some statement that is incorrect, they can charge us 7 million euro. If I do
Yeah.
something more flagrant than that, we're talking about, you can get up into the hundreds of millions pretty quickly if you look at the GDPR fines, right? That's pretty easy. You can quantify these sorts of things. And then the other side, you talk about selling. But anyway, I think we should do this as either a lunchtime babbling or
I'd
just
love
do it in
to.
the program.
Yeah, I think we could do some stuff. I know with the program we are trying to get a bunch of domain specific experts
Yep.
in to talk from these points of view, because these are the questions that we're fielding day in and day out. Obviously, we do the audit, we do the assurance, but it's almost like just most organizations deploying AI are just kind of getting this off the ground. Maybe 50, 60% of organizations may have this, just looking at some poll data from a recent speaking partner of ours. On the
Yep.
crowd, a couple thousand organizations represented. So there's so much opportunity there. I would say it's a competitive edge. You can sell more. You can trust that where you're trying to go, you achieve. So you're getting better ROI. You don't have to have as many, operations people. They like streamline. They don't want to course correct 3, 4 times because of fallouts or bad things or bad adoption. So I, I'm never short on finding value in AI governance at this stage of the game. So if anybody wants to, have a coffee,
Yep. Yep.
there you go. I got my web link on my LinkedIn.
Yep.
But either way, no, that'll be good. I think, uh, yeah, I think there's so much upside to governance, and people that get it right will, I think, ultimately win. And even aligning your policies with your clients and your customers is so important. And that's a whole breakdown on customer experience and customer value and what is value and those types of things. And aligning your policy to your clients. And I think that even challenges traditional business strategies. So there's a lot of fun stuff with AI for sure. And I have learned that most things in this world run on what are the laws and policies and the rules of the game.
Yep.
Those are very important. So if you want to dictate how things are played, governance is probably the spot to start, at least within your
Ab-
organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So Jeffrey gave us a list of things we had to talk about. I feel
I've
like we
been
covered,
peeking at them. I've been peeking at them.
yeah, but I think this is a good place to stop. But I think the reminder to people here is that we are coming out with this new certification program for business professionals. There's going to be a base kind of fundamentals part of it, but we're also going to be having add-on uh, courses for more specialized certifications, like legal team HR professionals, cybersecurity professionals. And so this is going to form the base, I think, of like this vision that we have of a workforce that is equipped with the sort of basic AI governance tools that they need to be successful. And so that's coming out in the next month, I would say, to this core one. And then the other ones are going to follow very, very rapidly. And so keep tabs on that. And if it's out by the time this video comes out, we'll definitely have a link for it.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to this on a podcast, thank you so much for listening. If you're watching us on YouTube, like and subscribe helps us out a lot. And we're excited to catch you next time on Lunchtime Babbling.